I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I am Dr. Matt Bernico, your co-host.
And I'm your other co-host and your other co-doctor, recently minted PhD, Dean Detloff. I've been a doctor for less than 3 days, and I'm still waiting for the checks to come in the mail. But I have academically recognized credentials by the government of the Netherlands specifically. So it's a doctor-to-doctor podcast from here on out.
Pretty good. That's right, folks. Email us your ailments and, tell us about your rash. Tell us about, your foot problem, toothache. We won't be able to answer them, but we would love to know about them.
Yeah, when Matt says tell us, he means tell him specifically. I personally do not want to hear about your foot problem, but Matt seems very excited about it. I'll leave that to you to learn more about. I think also, the medical questions, that's a tough one for me specifically. But if you do want to send us what's ailing you about your church committee or what's going on in your pastoral team, we might be able to diagnose what's happening there, give you a good prescription, a good Marxist tract that you could leave in the bathroom at your church, and that might cure it right up.
Yeah, that's right. Just slip something that looks like a $20 bill into the tithe plate, the offering plate, but it's actually just the opening to capital, and your pastor will open it up and get tricked into reading something about economics. And they'll love it. They'll become converted just when you do that. That's for sure. Yeah,
a nice little comic strip that just explains the role of capital in the production process, and slowly you can watch people discover their own exploitation in real time, and they'll see the white and come to your next communist meeting.
What I like to do is leave those communist tracts right on top of a urinal. People love that's where they're most receptive to political economy.
People like to put that stuff in their pockets.
Yeah, they definitely like to touch it and bring it home with them. The toilet literature, they love it.
It is toilet literature if you think about it. It's pretty appropriate.
I'm thinking about it, and you're right. It is appropriate. Hey, well, what's appropriate for this podcast is that we move right along here and introduce what we're actually going to do in this one. So in the past, just a few episodes ago, we did a pretty well-received episode. Everyone loved it. We got glowing reviews that starts at the ground level of Christianity and the socialist discourse and just lays out why these two things make sense together. So in the episode, we came at the issue from the standpoint of why Christians specifically should be socialists, right? It was the episode you're supposed to send to your mom or your family member, and some of you did it, and what a wild commitment that is, but okay. So we figured it all out. We did it in that episode, and it was great. And like I said, you loved it. It was great. Anyways, having done all of that, we thought it might be worth taking some time and thinking about the same question, but from the opposite end. So instead of why Christians should be socialists or something, or why Christians should be invested in socialism as a political movement or a strategy, or I don't know, one of those types of questions, we thought it might be good to think about why should socialists care about Christians. Let me be very clear here. We're not saying that socialists should be Christians or that you should become converted or whatever. No interest in that whatsoever. Please remain a committed atheist or agnostic or non-Christian person. That's fine with me. But what you should do is care about Christian people and see what they might have to offer a socialist movement. That's the I think the general aim of what we want to do here in this episode.
Yeah, and also maybe clearing up some of those issues around atheism that is always a perennial problem in the socialist left, whether you're a Marxist or an anarchist or something else. That's a real issue and a hurdle to figure out. And there's been a lot of history since everybody's favorite folks, Marx and Bakunin and everybody else, were telling you to quit going to church. That I think makes things a little more complicated. If you decide you got to go to church at the end of this, that's fine. You can sit by us, I guess. But yes, the key here is we're not evangelizing or converting people through the podcast. But I do think socialists should be convinced that there's actually a lot going on with Christianity that's important to consider for the sake of really building a socialist movement, for the sake of understanding global politics, for the sake of rooting out some of the Euro-chauvinism that is present in the socialist tradition. And, a lot of socialists have, I think, already outgrown the atheism of some of the sort of founding figures of the modern left. And to be clear, that atheism has its uses too. I'm not sour about it. But in a reductive sense, I think as a limiting sort of category, that atheism has a bad determining influence in some cases that's also worth sorting out. So we'll try to make the case to you can send this to your communist or anarchist mom.
Probably far fewer of those, but yeah.
Fewer, but nevertheless, I know they're out there. I've met a few myself, and you can say, look, Mom, it's important to understand there's something going on with Christianity, and here you go. I'm going to try to soften up your hardcore mom anarchist atheism.
That's right. We could probably also make, it's possible that similar points be made about people of different faith traditions or something like that. But, we're here for that. But maybe that one's not for us to do. So we're going to definitely stay in our lane and only talk about Christianity and socialism. We're going to let all of the other various faith and socialism podcasts, they can parcel out for themselves. I'm sure there's some good ones out there. So, let's get into it. Atheism and the left. There's a tradition of it, but there's just like there's a tradition of Christianity or religious people and leftist politics. There's also a pretty strong tradition of atheism and leftist politics, and fine, it definitely has its purposes. Like Dean said, not sour about it. The critique that people like Marx and Bakunin make of religion is sometimes a good one. Maybe we need to hear it, and I think that's a good. I think there's nothing wrong with the critique of religion, and I kind of embrace it actually a lot. It's pretty good. Just the same though, I think that people transform the the materialist engagement with religion through Marx as a real, I don't know, a real roadblock to them accepting religious people of any variety into socialist movements or into other types of leftist movements, and that is too bad. Just being people who are online on Twitter, I think we've had a handful of those folks kind of chime in every now and again on our Twitter accounts. Every time I bring it up on Twitter, I think someone will inevitably respond to me and be like, well, but you know what Marx said about religion, so you're dumb or whatever. I don't know, Dean, what do you say to those types of people? We can kind of get to the actual philosophical roots at the in a minute, but I don't know, what do you think of the people who just have maybe internalized these prohibitions on religion in dogmatic and unhelpful ways?
Yeah, I have a lot of time for people who are not convinced by Christianity or not convinced that it's a good thing in the world. I understand why people think that, and boy, is it hard to not think that. I don't know what would compel you not to think that unless you sort of had an investment in it and were already involved and so on. So, I have a lot of time, I think, for nuanced opinions about it and for committed atheists, and I spend a lot of time with committed socialist atheists, and I love them. They're great. But I think it's also important to recognize that even in some of the founding figures of a sort of, I don't like the word secular for a lot of reasons, but I'm going to use it here for a second, a kind of secular left tradition, which is to say a left tradition or a left socialist tradition that's outside of a Christian socialist tradition. Let's just put it that way. A lot of those figures, even while they have a really rowdy atheism or like a really strong invective kind of atheism, if you look at their lives too, they're constantly rubbing elbows with other kinds of socialists who may not think like them theologically and otherwise. And I think it's important to always be thinking clearly about that too, that we do have to reckon with atheism and the reasons for it, and what's really useful and what's maybe not so useful. And we also have to be willing to allow history to kind of intervene in those conversations. And I think my impression of people on the internet, at least, is there is a certain temptation to latch on to like a really good sentence from Marx or a really good sentence from some kind of anarchist writer and say, well, this is the sum total of what these traditions have to say about religion. And to me, that there's kind of an irony in it because it ends up dogmatizing a line here or there without taking in the full context of a famous quote, or taking in, again, the historical development of these living traditions and what else has gone on. So I think it's important to always allow ourselves to complicate things, to let history complicate things, and especially to allow revolutionary movements to sort of open up these questions even more than a text written here or there.
I think that, well, that's all a lot of good points. You've made so many. But the one thing that you said that really resonates with me right now, at least, is that, that like Marx or Bakunin or whoever, right? They are rubbing elbows with all these other people, and they're like in conversation with these different types of socialists and different types of working class movements. And like they themselves in their practice of politics or their organizing or whatever are not like politically pure in some way, like that, like you might want to think they are online. I was reading I don't know, some stuff about the Communist Manifesto the other day, and the Marx is writing it to like the Chartists in England, and these are people who are not like scientific socialists like you might think of them online or whatever. So it's just a good point though that that when you're talking about politics and you're talking about like actual movements of like people, you got a mixed bag of all kinds of different things going on, right? And no one has sort of like a clear and pure ideological standpoint regardless of like what Marx says or whatever in whatever passage of this commentary on Hegel. So yeah, there's just a lot going on there, and there's no real reason to like over determine one point or something.
Yeah, and I think I would add too that it's one thing to have atheist convictions, which I think again are totally fair and fine, but it's another thing to think through what those convictions open up and close down for you if you communicate them in a certain way or act on them in particular ways. And I always get a kick out of Marx himself. Was pretty adamant about the fact that, yes, he's an atheist, but also he thought it was very important to not let that atheism get in the way of organizing. And you see that same logic come up in Lenin. It comes up in Rosa Luxemburg, people who are pretty committed atheists. Lenin, perhaps even more so in a lot of respects. But there's that famous line in one of Lenin's essays on religion where he says, unity in the proletarian struggle is more important than unity of the proletariat's opinions on what happens after you die. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's also important too. We can make a distinction between saying no one's saying you should just give up your atheism or whatever, but if you want to win socialism, you're going to have to think of a way to communicate that commitment or soften it, or strategically maybe have it be a little bit more open than what you usually see in crabby Twitter debates or something.
Yeah, that's right. Well, all right, let's start at the very beginning then. Like I said a minute ago, if you ever bring up religion and socialism on the internet, someone will always respond to you and tell you about Marx and the opium of the people line or something. So let's just talk about that line, that bit from Marx, and we can kind of get into it. So this specific passage comes from Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, something that is, I mean, like, as Marx goes, kind of in the weeds too. It's not like this is Capital or something, right? Well, whatever. Anyways, it's good just the same. Marx's critique of Hegel and German ideology in general is great. So, anyways, the line that people get kind of bent out of shape about and maybe sometimes over determine is this one. Religious suffering is, at one and the same time, the expression of real suffering and protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, the soul of the soulless conditions. It's the opium of the people. So I think that I mean, the full quote gives you a lot more to go off of than just, religion is the opium of the people, or religion is the opium of the masses, right? That's just the end is what you hear quoted most oftentimes. And yeah, people say it, and what they mean by it is that religion is something that leads people astray, it distracts them, it tricks them, it fools them, one of these kinds of things. But in the context of the whole passage, you get a different kind of feeling about religion. Not that it's tricking people or fooling people, though I guess it is. I mean, it's one way to look at it for sure, but it is an expression of real suffering in the world. That religion is a way that people are grappling with the material conditions that they find themselves in. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature. Such a nice line. It's really pretty poetic, actually. But it tells you, it gives you a little bit of a different feel than just sort of like a staunch, angry atheist kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, there's so much to say about that passage. I actually just taught a class on Marxism and Christianity that takes a lot of cues from this passage in particular because it shows up all over. And there's so many things to say. The first is that Marx actually did not invent the analogy between religion and opium. That was like a really common thing in the 19th century. There's like a whole list of people who were using that comparison. But what Marx does do that is really unique, I think, and very interesting is the nature of his atheism is such that, sure, he doesn't believe in God, whatever. He has those epistemological commitments, but the way that he looks at religion is always as a product of human beings that responds to real material needs. And of course, it often becomes ideological. And, to be fair to Marx, this passage, the wider context, I think, gives you a little more wiggle room on religion. But he does end up basically, mocking religion later on. And that's fine. That's his right to do that. But it's important to sort of recognize that what's happening in a passage like this is reflective of Marx's real, authentic desire to understand how are people coping with the brutalities of capitalism, and having that sympathetic view, I think, of people's turn to religion is really important. The way I always describe the opium bit too is to say, it's not to say that it's an opiate in that it just distracts you from everyday life, but rather to see it as something like a beer that you have at the end of the day, right? Like you had a really long day, your boss yelled at you, whatever, and at the end you just want to relax and chill out. And of course that can stop you from politicizing or from understanding your argument with your boss in political terms, but it's also like this is just what people have to do to survive sometimes and get by. So I think it's always important to expand those analogies and see the real sophistication even of the kind of atheism that Marx is trying to inject into his own socialist writing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess on the one hand, I feel kind of silly, like we have to, like we're doing like the exegetical work with Marx or whatever, like you would the Bible or something.
Yeah.
But like, it's interesting though, because I think that a lot of times, people who are antagonistic towards religion will actually use this bit of Marx in a similar way to like evangelicals and like different types of like clobber verses about, I don't know, LGBTQ stuff or whatever. Who knows, right? People will take this bit of Marx and use it as a bludgeon to gatekeep, who they think should be involved in socialist politics or something, and that sucks because it's clearly not the kind of thing that Marx is sort of getting at here, right? Marx is driving towards a certain type of materialist understanding of religion as a phenomena among people, not as like a bludgeon to like keep people from becoming like realized as a working class like organization or party or something. Different things are going on in each of these contexts.
Yeah. So I think Marx gives you a certain kind of atheism. I think there's another kind of atheism that departs in the anarchist tradition from Marx a little bit, and it's important to maybe talk about that too. I mean, we'll probably spend most of our time talking about Marxism in this episode, let's be honest. But nevertheless, there is an anarchist piece to this. We've been mentioning Bakunin. Bakunin drives me up the wall sometimes, just like he drove Marx up the wall, I guess, but for different reasons. And most famously, Bakunin wrote a book called God and the State. We talked about it a long time ago on this podcast. I I can't remember where or even what we said, but
yeah, it was early on for sure.
Yeah, don't listen to it. This line, though, I think is a good way of summarizing it. So Bakunin says, the idea of God implies the abdication of human reason and justice. It is the most decisive negation of human liberty and necessarily ends in the enslavement of mankind, both in theory and practice. And man is right. For Bakunin, I think, there's kind of a sort of obvious piece to this that God is the ultimate cop, right? The state that's out there, out in the heavens, that wants to make you subject to it or something for all of eternity. And, again, to be fair, a lot of Christianity especially does function that way. So it's not completely off the mark. But at the same time, I think Bakunin's kind of naive anti-authoritarianism that he sometimes has really also holds back his own critique of religion and his own atheism from at least the kind of sophistication I see in Marx.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Bakunin is not Marx. Sorry, anarchists. I don't know. I feel so torn about the Bakunin stuff, honestly. I mean, I feel that way because God in the State is a really cool book, actually. If you're a Christian, you should for sure read it. It is, I think, actually worth your time, despite his maybe the naive take on Christianity and religion sometimes that he has. But I don't know. There's something very appealing to me. I think maybe it's my inner teenager that I've never really outgrown, like the sort of anti-authoritarianism and all of it. I love that. But it's a cool book, and I think that it is worth if you're a person who is a Christian, it is worth sitting with some of the ideas, even if they are sort of naive, to see. I don't know if they have any kind of play with you, or if they if they seem true in any ways. It's Christianity does a lot to our brains, insofar as it breaks them utterly and reorders them in ways that are sometimes good and usually a lot of times bad. But it's a great way to interrogate some of those things that you believe. Like, is God in your brain a cop? And or is God like an authoritarian state that you have? And if so, hey, maybe you should consider that. Maybe you should listen to Bakunin. But I mean, the other way though, Bakunin has this sort of like you said, naive understanding of religion and Christianity and what God might be and the way that human beings are. There's a supreme anarchism, especially highlighted in this one sentence I picked out too, where it centers humans, human individuals as sort of like the center of politics and belief and society. God gets in the way of your liberty or whatever, and you end up kind of becoming enslaved to an idea. And it's a little bit much, but not altogether worth ignoring.
Yeah. One thing I will say about God in the State, also though, just to add, in addition, I also think it's great to read. There's a lot of cool, helpful stuff in there. But I always sort of say this in conversations about religion and the left. One thing that Bakunin's secularism, again, I hate that term, but I don't know. Well, I'll just say his atheism. I'm just going to keep finding better words. One thing about his atheism in particular is, although he's an atheist with respect to every god, he actually kind of imbibes the Christian story about Judaism and becomes a rabid anti-Semite in that text, which is, I think, actually a really important thing for people on the left to think through too, that there are ways in which the secularism, and here I will use it on purpose, the secularism of people on the left is actually profoundly Christian in a lot of bad ways, a lot of toxic ways. So in some ways too, we're never done with dealing with kind of the fallout of Christianity and religion, even in these atheist traditions. So I guess I take that to say, definitely read God in the State, but also be this anti-Semitic stuff is garbage, and I want to get rid of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point to bring up. It does. I mean, dealing with this is why secularism is such a troubling and difficult word, because so much of religion has leached its way into that way of thinking. So it becomes very tricky.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother podcast episode. Secularism is a wild thing. We'll get around to it. But all that to say, I think we can leave these characters behind. But I think that they're good. Getting Marx and Bakunin on the table here is a good way of saying these are some dominant strands of atheism on the left. And I think it's actually really important to affirm them as interesting and useful. Communists and socialists and anarchists should be proud of that tradition insofar as it is trying to really escape the talons of the church, which is a real big problem. Any honest Christian revolutionary person, I think, won't be afraid of that and facing up to that and recognizing it. But it's also important to recognize that their atheism, too, is complicated and interesting and often more open. And it's also just because, again, someone is sort of a committed atheist like Marx in a theoretical sense, that doesn't preclude him from politically understanding that, there's a time and a place for that conversation. And it's not something that you want to just use in order to feel better about yourself and drive other people away. So in my experience, that has not happened that often to me, although I have had a few experiences of like meeting a weird Trotskyite. I'm sorry to pick on them, but it was literally a weird Trotskyite at a rally who found out I was there because I was a Christian one time. And he was like, "Oh, Christians, they can't be revolutionaries and they can't be Marxists." And it's like, all right, man, I guess we won't hang out. That's it. That's the end of that story.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, again, we're not trying to like convert anybody, just like trying to say you should make space for this in your your big worldview or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, let's just turn to some other people then. Let's interrogate some more interesting ideas that will help make that space in people's brain. Okay, so how about this? Another essay we've talked about, but a very long time ago, is a essay called "Religion and the Left" by Cornel West that was first published in the Monthly Review, but then was later included in the Cornel West Reader. Go get the Monthly Review, go get the Cornel West Reader. I don't know, just buy a big stack of books is basically what we're always trying to say. Anyways, here's a quote from Cornel West that's kind of interesting that gets at something deeper going on here. West says this: "Ironically, the major figures of so-called Western Marxism were preoccupied with culture, but none was materialist enough to take religion seriously." A pretty cool dig, actually, about about materialism, right? The Marxist theory of culture is always looking for I don't know, like the structure and the superstructure and like how they kind of interplay or whatever. But rarely did they actually consider religion in a way deeper than that, right? Religion in this like, I mean, a very particular Marxist view is like the thing that spurs on the current state of things, that keeps workers working, that keeps capital accruing for capitalists and so on. But that particular view leaves out a whole lot of very interesting things about about religion, about the ways that it's created, wild utopian communities, or ways that it's inspired people to take up arms in cases of socialist revolution. Yeah, Cornel West is right. I think.
Yeah, I one thing I love about that essay too is in it he says a lot of Marxists have given us really moving and powerful analyses of things like the novel, right, or film, or other kinds of I guess like cultural objects that are not directly related to like going to work in a factory or something like that. And Marxists have been keen to like develop really creative understandings of those artistic and cultural products, but they arbitrarily leave out religion. So they're willing to say like, yeah, after the revolution, maybe we'll still have the novel, even though the novel is a product of bourgeois capitalist society, right? But nevertheless, they don't extend that same kind of analytical clarity to religion. And West pushes that further in an interesting way. He goes on in that essay to say, the major contribution that religious revivals can make to left strategy is to demand that Marxist thinkers and activists take seriously the culture of the oppressed. This fundamental shift in the sensibilities and attitudes of Marxists requires a kind of desecularizing and de-Europeanizing of Marxist praxis, a kind of laying bare and discarding of the deep-seated Enlightenment prejudices that shape and mold the perspectives and perceptions of most Marxists. And I like this point a lot because, first of all, I like the idea of taking the culture of the oppressed seriously. I think that's really significant. And then secondly, the fact that Marxism does develop in a Eurocentric way, it sort of sucks in a lot of Eurocentric ideas. I just mentioned, Bakunin sucks in the Christian story about Jews in a weird way and then reproduces it as an atheist. And Marx does something kind of similar sometimes by sucking in certain European prejudices and maybe isn't as open to the kind of cultural forms of other people, especially colonized people. And I think that, the lesson of the 20th century really is that religion can be a really, really powerful, motivating, driving force. Now, to Marx's credit, like, he's writing at a time where there's definitely no such thing as liberation theology, right? Or any other kind of revolutionary theology. So these are unforeseeable probably from his point in time. But I think from our point in time in the 21st century, we can't really plead ignorance on that score. And Cornel West saying, look, we have to kind of get rid of the Eurocentric bias that's saying we shouldn't take religion seriously. I think that's a really big point that communists and socialists of any kind of faith or no faith at all should really invest themselves in.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, sure, the historical stuff is probably important. I mean, just thinking through it practically, though, like, if you are a member of any kind of socialist organization, right, and you're trying to, you're doing the organizing work and trying to get people to show up for something or, come to a meeting or come to a rally or whatever, like, I don't know, the precondition cannot be that, like, also you have to be an atheist. Like, it's just not going to work. Like, I don't know, like, people who are, whether you like it or not, religion of some variety. I mean, Christianity is probably the dominant paradigm, I suppose. But like, it's in the water. People have imbibed it. I mean, working class people know it. Like, even if they don't currently go to church or if they are sort of ambivalent about religion, I'm sure they have some kind of experience with it. And to either like ignore that as an avenue for organizing or as some type of motivation for organizing, or just to like try to counter it with some other type of like atheist ideology seems really, I don't know, like a very complicated way to get to your endpoint, right? If you're having that kind of conversation with somebody and you want to like, I don't know, like come to my socialist meeting, but also you should disavow religion or something is like a conversation you probably aren't going to have any good success in. So I mean, just like very straightforwardly, taking serious the culture of the oppressed is making some space for people who probably believe things that aren't like the things.
And it also forces you to write off whole swaths of the planet where socialism is significant as a driving force, because you can't really understand the way that politics and culture and religion go together in different ways in the global South, for example. I always think of what's going on even in experiments like Allende's Chile. Allende was purposefully open to the participation of Catholics, in part because it's like, how could he afford not to be in Chile? But also because there were a bunch of people who were willing to be like, yeah, we'll throw down, as priests and sisters and nuns and lay people in a Christian way. And Allende was like, yeah, that's fine. Show up that way. The same goes for, what's going on in Brazil with the Workers' Party and the MST. And we were always talking on this podcast about the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, which are the big high point, I think, of a bunch of Christians and Marxists who got together and did a revolution and pulled it off, right? And I think if you have a really reductive view of atheism, not only does it stop you from organizing, like you were just saying, Matt, but it also stops you from actually having a meaningful point of solidarity with other people elsewhere. You just like cannot say that you understand what's going on and affirm the Sandinista revolution if you're like a Reddit atheist, like it's not possible to hold those two things together. So that's a huge piece too. Global solidarity matters. And that means you kind of have to soften up at least a certain atheist commitment.
I think that's right. I mean, it's again, the point isn't that you have to like believe it, but it's like it's the way you comport yourself towards other people about having like some type of respect for different beliefs, and also just like understanding the phenomena as something that exists in the world, and maybe like what that might mean. Yeah, so that's a lot going on there. Yeah, I mean, so the larger question, if you followed us this far, Atheist Communist Mom that we've imagined just for this episode. If you followed us this far, then the question is like, okay, fine. I will make space in my brain that for religious people getting into like socialist politics, or to come to my meeting, or to, whatever. But like, what is it that Christians are actually contributing to the discourse, to the dialogue, to action, and so on? So Dean, go ahead and lay it out for me. What are Christians contributing?
Yeah, this is always the hardest part. I wonder, maybe we even said this on the Christian version of this episode, I can't remember, but it's actually way easier to say what something like Marxism or socialism can do for Christians, and way harder to go in the other direction, without ending up being evangelizing or proselytizing. But I don't think it's impossible, and I think that we also have a lot of historical situations that help us think it through in a little more complicated ways, and also some gifted theologians who are thinking critically about their own situations that offer a lot. So yeah, I'll try my best to get us going. The first thing I'll say is it is massively important to recognize that like no honest Christian person involved in socialism or the revolution is going to be upset about calling out the church's hypocrisy or abuses. That's huge. So like trying to say that there are Christian contributions is not a way of being like, and look, that's why actually it's been fine the whole time. It doesn't like exculpate Christianity or the church. And, Christians have to be fighting against that ourselves, even in a more committed way, I think, than our atheist comrades. But all that to say, I don't want it to be construed as like I'm wiping over all the other stuff. The communist mom who's very pissed that women can't be priests is rightly pissed. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Nevertheless, here's one thing that whenever someone says, "What can Christians contribute to the Marxist conversation?" I always talk about the revolutionary subject. This is kind of a heady point. We'll come to the history later, but this is at least how I've squared it for myself. So Marxism in particular is really invested in the proletariat as the revolutionary subject, right? Because of their relationship to the point of production. The whole idea is all the power is with the working class. That's where the labor power is. It's where the profit is basically generated, right? All the value is added by that labor. So at the end of the day, if you really want a revolution, you've got to organize the working class, because nothing happens without them, right? If everybody goes on strike, then the whole world stops. And I think that's true. I think the story Marx tells is true, and I agree. We got to invest in the proletariat in a particular way because of its unique relation to the mode of production. However, I also think Christianity has like a way more expansive view of its revolutionary subject, which is basically the poor in a very broad stroke. So what I mean by that is, Marx and Engels, they write off the underclass of society, or what they call the lumpen proletariat, the criminal class, they sometimes call it. And these are basically the marginal of the marginals, people who probably are not going to affect a revolution. And they give all kinds of reasons why they think that is. They're unorganized. They're not, they're not at the point of production, and so on. Christianity, though, sees that group of people actually as, the face of Christ, right? The least of these. And I think that it's not unscientific, actually, to say that there is some really radical revolutionary potential in that social position in itself. And just to sort of put a fine point on it, that I'm not just like theologizing our way out of materialism, I think this is actually where movements like the Black Panther Party or the Young Lords were most effective, was in that criticism of Marxism, of saying, look, you're writing off all these people that are basically our community, and we, literally can't afford to do that. We would have no one to organize in that respect. So I think you don't have to be a Christian, of course, to feel that way, but Christianity does have this kind of historical commitment to the poor and to valorizing the poor, and at its best to politicizing the poor. You know, like in Brazil, the landless movement is largely a movement that is shot through with liberation theology and Christian language and Christian organizers and people. So that's my first one that I'll put on the table, that Christianity can offer a more expansive understanding of the revolutionary subject, not in place of the proletariat, but as a way of just keeping our revolutionary horizons bigger than reducing ourselves to organizing the proletariat.
It's good. That's a good way to lay it all out. Well, another way to think about it, another way to think about what Christians can contribute to, like working class politics, to socialism, is that Christianity, for better or worse, sometimes worse, is oftentimes like it's a common language for like people in the working class or in other classes. So I mean, one reason to kind of like make space for Christians and socialist movements is that it gives you a group of people who know how to speak that language, right? Like that seems important. I think that I told this story on the Valley Labor Report live stream we did, but I guess I'll tell it again here. But so I was at this like strike a few weeks ago now, and if you go to a strike where there's like a speaking program or something, chances are like you're gonna see a pastor there. Like it is more likely than not. I mean, maybe you live in a place where that kind of thing is completely impossible or whatever. Who knows? But in my experience, in all of the different labor, I guess, actions I've been to, there's usually a pastor, a priest, someone there with some type of like religious background. And they'll get up and they'll say something very interesting. God is with the workers. God's on the side of the workers. They'll kind of invoke some kind of language about like wealth or something. Maybe I just have very good community, good community of like pastors or something. But it kind of happens. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not unusual to see a pastor show up at a labor action or whatever. And that's cool. And that definitely does speak to people, right? Like using that type of language definitely kind of like can make an impact on people at a labor action. But I guess the thing that really sticks out to me is after the fact. So after people go on strike, if the union foresees that there might be like a problem with that person returning to work, like they might get harassed or retaliated against, people often do things called like walkbacks. Like you go with the worker back into the job so that you and the community of people that like were on strike with them or that stood with them on the strike line, you tell their manager that like this person, they went on strike, and like the strike's over, whatever. They have a legal right to do that and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Like, and if you mess this person, like we'll come back we'll come back and like we'll cause a problem for you or whatever. We'll like pick at the store or whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyways, so like the strike happened, the strike was over. We walked back, and the person that was kind of leading the walk back was the one of the pastors at my church, which is like particularly interesting to me. And what was fascinating is that this guy, he's I don't know, he's probably my age or something, maybe a little bit younger, I can't tell. He was like wearing his collar and like his sort of like full priestly uniform, and he like walked in and told the manager like, this person's coming back to work, like whatever, this is their right, this is like what you need to know about it. And then like we left, and like just like the presence of someone that had like the presence of a pastor, the presence of someone that has like the sort of like priestly collar on. I mean, he's an Episcopal priest, so it's like a whole thing. It's it's it doesn't carry the same weight maybe as the full grandeur of the Roman Catholic Church, but still it's cool. But it has a sort of moral authority that is not present if it were just like a bunch of like regular people walking in, right? There's a sort of like mystery and grandeur to wearing like a specific uniform that signals to other people that you have a moral authority. And like that is super valuable. I mean, you maybe you don't believe in Christianity and like the whole idea of God is like very stupid to you, and like fine. but other people don't think that. And it is, like, I think amongst many people there is sort of some belief that like people who are pastors have some type of moral superiority, which is, probably misfound there. But still, if you want to know who knows how to live a good life or do the right and ethical thing, somebody asking a pastor is probably not outside of your own imagination. So having somebody like that can show up and say like, this is what the situation is, and like this is what you should do or whatever, to somebody who is exploitative, like a boss or a manager or an employer, it's pretty powerful, right? Like that's somebody that you want on your side. You want moral authority. I, it- people have a lot of negative, like capitalists, I guess is who I'm talking about here. Capitalists have a lot of negative feelings about socialism, right? That it is uh, morally suspect. It's trying to get something for nothing. All these kinds of like feelings about lazy workers and whatnot. Um, but like when you have someone who has some type of moral authority on your side, it looks different,
Hmm.
and that's important.
Yeah, I think that's right. And even beyond the moral authority piece, just speaking from kind of a strictly sociological point of view, pastors are representative of communities, and I think that's always really significant as well. That let's say the capitalists, their conscience isn't pricked, they don't have a second look at whatever, and we can imagine all kinds of callous bosses who don't give a shit about who's showing up and telling you what to do, whether they have a collar or not. Still, at the end of the day, a pastor has a church behind them. And man, if you thought the union was rough, imagine the union and also a congregation. And that pastor also probably knows other pastors, right? And again, like, it's not to say this is a magic wand of solidarity building. I mean, this is the challenge, I think, of organizing, is making these links. But it is a real thing that the pastor is a node of connection in a group of people that are already getting together to do something together at least once a week, and probably more. So that's a huge piece as well, just in the materialist side of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's no one crankier than church people, so
Right. Yeah,
watch
yeah.
out.
It's worth pointing out too that, you know, even just beyond the moral authority piece as well, it's important to see how historically the kind of mobilizing power that a pastor has is really unique. They can kind of be a little more playful, I think, when it comes to politics and when it comes to maybe challenging certain people in power to speak in a different register. I always think about that with, Reverend Martin Luther King. The whole point of his organizing in the civil rights movement is not totally reducible to him being a pastor, but it's also like he probably, he couldn't have done it without being a pastor, or at least being a pastor opened up avenues for the
Yeah.
civil rights movement that wouldn't have been opened up otherwise. And you see that repeated in, of course, a different way, but no less meaningful, I think, with someone like Reverend William Barber today. People who are just willing to kind of invoke the prophetic language of a tradition, right? And they're trained rhetoricians. They can kind of pose questions to people in power in ways that the rest of us maybe can't, and they're sort of viewed. they can sort of take on the character of being a bit naive sometimes on purpose in order to make a sneaky point, or they can take on the character of being, the thundering Hebrew prophet that's like out there to tell you that the rich are going down. And I think that's important too, that the character of Christian people embodied in pastors, but also in just kind of the tradition in general, opens up different conversational spaces for building a socialist vision for everybody.
So there's a moral reason and a sociological reason. It's a good way to start thinking about it. All right, well, let's take one more stop on the train that is this episode. That's a weird analogy. I don't know why. Sometimes I just start saying something and I don't know why. I don't know where it's going to end. And
I like it. I like being on this train.
Go figure. Yeah, choo choo. All right. Well, the last stop here is as usual is the Fidel Castro stop. So a book that we turn to, I mean, I don't know, a lot. It's on this podcast we always talk about the Gospel and Soltaname, and we always talk about Fidel and Religion, like an interview book from Fry Beto. a priest from Brazil. And right now, we're gonna not talk about gospel and Soltaname. We are gonna talk about Fidel and religion. So the Fidel and religion book is so fascinating because Fidel parses out the exact question we're kind of talking through here. Like, what is it that Christians can kind of give to an anti-capitalist struggle, a struggle for socialism? I mean, he's talking about Cuba specifically, but I think the rule generally applies, maybe. So here, let me read this to you. Um, so Fidel says, from a strictly political point of view, I think I know something about
I
politics.
love that.
Yeah, I believe that it is possible for Christians to be Marxists as well and to work together with Marxists, communists, and transform the world. The important thing is that in both cases, they be honest revolutionaries who want to end exploitation of man by man, or, human by human, you might say, and to struggle for a fair distribution of social wealth, equality, fraternity, and dignity of all human beings, that is. That they be standard bearers of the most advanced political, economic, and social ideas, even though in the case of Christians, their standing point is a religious concept. So Fidel thinks that there's a lot of energy here. That okay, not only can Christians be Marxists, so that's cool, and it turns out he really meant it because he opened up the membership to the Communist Party in Cuba to Christians after this, so that's something. Um, but maybe a Christian themselves, they aren't a socialist, they aren't a Marxist, they aren't anything, right? They just identify as a Christian, and maybe they're sort of like left leaning, but they wouldn't identify with socialism. Doesn't mean you can't work with those people, even yet, right? As long as they are honest in that they want a whole world with an end in exploitation. These are people that you can work with. They can be comrades in a struggle for sure, even if they don't share each point of ideological purity or something.
Yeah, and not only can Christians and Marxists get together in interesting ways, like our good friend Fidel says, and he does know something about politics for sure. Something else that Fidel points out in that book that I really appreciate is that by being too heavy-handed in anti-religious criticism, you actually end up driving people into the open arms of the oppressing class. Religion is like a really easy thing to get people upset about. And by removing the kind of myth of religious persecution, for example, or by even better, like welcoming a religious element into the revolution, I think that you also end up building kind of like you take away a certain weapon that the oppressing class has, and you gain also a weapon yourself. And I think you gain a lot of PR points. I mean, this is something that happened in Nicaragua after the revolution. A lot of the religious people who were involved, especially the priests, were basically like going on speaking tours throughout the world. And it was a huge point of pride for the Sandinista movement to be like, look, we're not oppressing the church. We literally have priests in the government, and I think that is really significant. And just, again, by virtue of thinking carefully about how to really build socialism and, the hard kinds of things that go on in building socialism, being willfully sort of too frothing at the mouth, I guess, about religion just creates a problem for everybody that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, exactly. Appropriating it. I mean, this is maybe cynical sounding, but like appropriating it so it can't be used against you is not a bad idea. Maybe appropriating is the wrong word, but or giving it space or something that it can kind of like function alongside or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? You don't want people to you don't want people to use religion against you. I mean, the fact is that it already is, and that needs to be sorted out too. But you want to give space to people within different traditions to be a part of your movement. That is what makes it a good movement that has kind of flexibility.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, this is a development of the Marxist tradition. And I think, well, obviously, I think it's a political improvement as well. But I think it's also a development that happens in light of historical circumstance, right? Like something else that comes out in that book, Fidel and Religion, Fidel says, when we at one point they banned Catholics from being members of the Communist Party, and Fray Beto asks him to explain that some more, and Castro says, "Well, we didn't ban them because they're Catholics. Like we think you can be a Catholic and be a revolutionary." But the church just happened to be pretty thoroughly reactionary in Cuba, which is true. It's very different from a lot of other places in the world. And so he said the banning wasn't because of their religion. It was just because they were associated with a pretty big bastion of counter-revolutionary force in society. And later on, the Cuban party removed that prohibition, which is no longer true. You can be a Catholic and a member of the Communist Party of Cuba now, and you couldn't before. And I think that's all sort of what any good Marxist should recognize, right? Is that the different demands require sort of different responses. And the more you can afford to sort of open up to those kinds of things, the better off it's going to be. People feel like they live in a participatory society. And again, you don't have to be religious yourself, but it's kind of like, you know, don't give somebody a reason to dislike you when they already have enough ideological bombardments sort of pummeling them every day to turn them against socialism.
Yeah, I think that's right. You just don't want other people to use, I don't know, something against you. It doesn't make any sense. Don't do that. Well, before we completely close out the show, I think there is one more interesting point to bring up, and I don't know exactly what to make of it, but it is kind of interesting. So Fray Beto, he says to Fidel Castro, socialist and communist society also seeks the development of man's spiritual life, kind of asking it as like a question. And Castro has this kind of interesting answer that I don't know, fascinating. He says, yes, of course, we seek man's broadest material and spiritual development. That's exactly how I've put it when I've spoken about education and culture. And you might also add, and man's spiritual development in the religious sense. We make it a principle that all individuals are to have that freedom and opportunity. So I guess like what's interesting here to me is that I mean, kind of like we were saying earlier, that there are these like Marxist theories of the novel or of like film or whatever, right? That like there are these ways that socialists have thought like what these things would look like post-revolution, and I think Fidel Castro was thinking about these things too. Um, yeah, I mean about Catholicism, about Christianity, I mean about religion. I think in broadly as it exists in Cuba, probably not just with Christianity, but other forms too. Um, but I mean, Christians have something to say about that. But you know, in a revolutionary context, it all looks a little bit different. But to be open to it, I think is most kind of important takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. Well, all right, we're here at the end. I guess to sort of summarize the points here, there's a lot of atheism in the tradition of the left, and I think a lot of it's very good. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that on this episode, but we do on the podcast in general, obviously. There's a lot of important stuff that Christians still don't understand about the oppressive nature of our own faith tradition, and the left has a lot of good things to offer in its own atheist suspicion. So I think people should hold on to that suspicion and try to metabolize it as best they can. At the same time, things are always more complicated. Even the atheist tradition is more complicated. And I think the more you go through history and the more people have to figure out how to create a massive change that is popular, that gets the people on their side, that is worth defending, that people are ready to appreciate, the more people end up having to nuance their opinions on things like religion and figure out how to make these not only not barriers, but actually how to sort of turn people into partners and co-laborers and people who can, you know, like Lenin says, have a unity in the struggle, even if they don't have a unity in their metaphysics or something like that. And I don't know, for me, that has always been one of my favorite things about organizing, especially with other communists I know. The ones that I know are always very quick to sort of affirm that religion can be an important thing. And they affirm, yeah, if you can get more religious folks down to this rally, that'd be great. The more people down here telling this politician to stop intervening in Venezuela or something, the better, whether they go to church or not, you know? And I think it's always important for people on the left to sort of see what kind of contributions something like Christianity can offer to those kinds of struggles.
Yep, that's good. That's the good socialist point. Can you get more people down to this rally? That's what we need. Christian or otherwise, we don't care.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to us and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. You can also find us on Twitter at the Magnificast. You can email us at themagnificast@gmail.com. Our music is by Amaria Armstrong, and our outro is by the Illogical Spoon. We'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least I would've